Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
It's Thursday, and this is your Daily Detroit for May 21st, 2020. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. Well, just as Michigan slowly recovers from what everyone hopes is the worst effects of the global pandemic, devastating floods hit mid-Michigan. We bring you up to speed on that.
We've also got the latest coronavirus numbers from the state and city of Detroit.
A new poll looks at the partisanship of the pandemic in Michigan.
We've got news on the MOGO bike share in the burbs.
And the status on plans for the Woodward Dream Cruise and the annual Detroit-Windsor fireworks display.
All of that and then some straight ahead.
First, as is customary, the coronavirus numbers. The state of Michigan on Wednesday reported 659 new confirmed coronavirus cases and 43 deaths in the last 24 hours. That nudges the statewide totals above 53,000 cases and 5,000 deaths. In the city of Detroit, there were just 39 new cases reported. Meanwhile, Oakland County is expanding their drive-through testing capacity, including free tests for all adults and returning workers. We'll put a link to the show notes, but they will have testing sites in Southfield, Pontiac, and Novi.
Now to the story that has bumped the coronavirus off the front pages across Michigan. On Tuesday, floodwaters near Midland up in central Michigan caused one dam to fail and overtopped another after the area saw between 4 and 7 inches of rain earlier in the week in what experts called a 500-year event. The raging torrent forced the evacuation of an estimated 11,000 residents from their homes. Governor Gretchen Whitmer has declared a state of emergency for Midland County. There had been no fatalities or serious injuries reported as we recorded this. Part of downtown Midland was underwater on Wednesday, including the county courthouse and the Grace A. Dow Memorial Library. Floodwaters were not expected to crest until Wednesday evening.
The Edenvale Dam, which is the one that first collapsed, has a long history of neglect. It's owned by Boyce Hydropower, LLC, which owns 4 dams on the Tittabawassee River. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in 2018 revoked their license for power generation following numerous violations and concerns that it wouldn't be able to withstand a major flood. The agency notified the former owner in 1999 that it needed to increase the capacity to release overflow water and relieve pressure on the dam structure itself. According to the Detroit News, FERC classified Edenville as a high-hazard dam. Plans were underway for a local government authority to purchase all 4 dams from Boyce to make repairs, but the sale wasn't expected to be complete until early 2022. Whitmer, in a news conference on Wednesday, pledged to hold the dam owner responsible. Meanwhile, Dow Chemical, which is headquartered in Midland, confirmed that floodwaters have mixed with its on-site containment ponds. That's triggered an emergency response from Dow and also raised fears about toxic contamination. Sven, if we didn't think it was bad before.
Oh my God, this is just staggering. I think everybody across Michigan today is just feeling like what could possibly be next? I mean, in the midst of a global pandemic, nonetheless, when, FEMA resources are being stretched already, and now we've got this devastating flood that, is absolutely going to be so destructive to Midland and some of the surrounding cities up there. I mean, we saw photos that somebody posted on Facebook. I don't know how you found that, Jared, but I don't know if that's somebody but somebody who was standing in one of the lakes that is essentially the impoundment behind one of the dams that gave way. And she's just standing out in like mud flats that used to be lake bottom until, Tuesday. And now it's just like all these homes that used to be waterfront cottages are now just fronting mud.
I feel like that's got to be a very stunning sight to wake up in the morning, especially if you've lived there for a while, and look out the window and you used to have a large lake with your boat there, and then it's just mud.
That's, people losing their waterfront home status is the least of this. I mean, these are people's homes that are going to be destroyed, no doubt. There are a lot of property damage in downtown. And I mean, meanwhile, as we were recording this, we haven't hit peak flood stage water levels yet. So in some ways the worst is yet to come. And it's going to be a while. The water's going to have to retreat before they can even make a determination of how bad the damage is. But this is just devastating.
Well, one of the things that you were mentioning when we were getting ready for the show, Sven, was that you just, funnily enough, you're reading a book that ties pretty much right with this.
Yeah. So this was interesting. I'm reading a book. It's called Cadillac Desert by an author named Mark Reisner. It was published in 1986. And my brother-in-law gave me this book. Sounds like a really wonky title. It's all about water development in the Western United States, but very fascinating, like just an incredibly well-researched and well-told story about history, basically. And I was just reading on Tuesday night Reisner's riveting account of the Teton Dam Failure. This was 1976, a huge dam in eastern Idaho that gave way less than a year after it was completed and caused major devastation, like swept entire towns off the map, carried topsoil away and, leaving nothing but bedrock in this former farmland country and everything. And so I had just read this when I came downstairs on Tuesday night, turned on my computer and started reading all about what was going on in Midland. And I just thought, oh my God, this is just crazy. So what's interesting is this book spends a lot of time talking about the dam building spree that the United States went on starting in the early 20th century or fairly early 20th century between the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation. The two agencies often competed against each other, in fact, to build dams. You have to kind of understand, as the author writes, this was a reflection of a really different era and a different way of kind of looking at wild rivers. Especially out west where it's dry, it's arid, there's not a lot of rainfall. Damming was often promoted as a way to provide not only drinking water, but maybe even more importantly, to convert formerly, arid desert land into agriculture, put it into agricultural production. And what you saw over the 20th century is that dams became kind of like the ultimate pork barrel spending in Congress, right? Like a lot of these dams had really shaky justifications, like rationales for why they were being built. There was this wild rush, as the author puts it, to build dams, even when there wasn't necessarily a good economic case. A lot of them made no sense economically. They were never going to generate enough power or put enough agricultural production into work, and the water that they would provide, it was just incredibly heavily subsidized by taxpayers. But it didn't matter. Every lawmaker wanted a dam and wanted to bring a dam home to his constituents. Now, I don't know the full history of these dams up in Midland on the Tittabawassee River. We know that the Edenvale Dam, the one that failed, was built in 1925. But clearly, as the FERC classified them as a high hazard dam, they were built uphill from a mid-sized city of about 40,000 people at considerable risk to that city. And these were also hydroelectric dams. We know obviously in Michigan there's no need to build dams to provide drinking water. We've got abundant freshwater resources here. But this comes as, we talked about the history of neglect at that dam. And there have been lots of reports about aging dams all across the United States that are in dire need of repair. And, engineers have basically said that they're, in danger of failing. In fact, I think every year I saw a tweet that said every year there's an average of 10 dams that fail. And the trend has really been across the country to start decommissioning and removing these dams and let rivers go back to their natural flow.
One of the things that strikes me about this, though, is that this goes back to this old saw that I'm sure long-term listeners of this show are probably sick of me saying by now, but infrastructure. And I don't think people realize that we actually have a number of dams in Metro Detroit as well, not as large, but they are around here, and they are, near 100 years old. And it's something where it's not just these dams, but all kinds of things where we could have failures like this. And I hope that this is a lesson to do more than just this particular dam, but to look at this situation across the state. There's so much infrastructure that we just have not spent on in the last 20, 30 years. And the bill will come due, or we're going to have more things like this.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking all about, fixing the damn roads. And then in the middle of that, here's a giant dam failure up in Midland.
Who knew? Fixing the damn dams.
All right, Jer, the historian and author John Meacham has said that this is a quote-unquote partisan pandemic, but now it looks like there's some new data to back all this up.
Yeah, the Detroit Regional Chamber has done another one of their in-depth polls, this time around the coronavirus, Governor Whitmer's response, and of course, businessy topics like how workers feel about returning to work and where people feel returning to visit. And as someone who gets a lot of comments about how everyone thinks Whitmer is doing a bad job, or like all the folks, and I've shared some of these with you too, Sven, spouting off what they think must be what everybody else thinks. Well, I prefer to look at data instead of angry people on Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, man, I don't always envy your job getting all the hater mail.
So folks know around this poll, it was of 600 Michiganders last week by cell phone and landline, and it was done by the Glengariff group, longtime pollsters. And what they found was an approval rating for Governor Gretchen Whitmer in terms of her handling of the crisis of nearly 64%. That's almost 2/3 of respondents, which is kind of mind-blowing. And when people think about organizations commissioning polls, the chamber is not putting their finger on these polls. But if anyone's questioning a business group that's got a poll out that says 2/3 of people support a Democrat is kind of stunning. And that's up actually from 57% in April. So despite a concerted social media and AstroTurf campaign, as it's clear now, Sven, that through multiple reports, they're saying that many of the most extreme anti-Whitmer forces are actually funded by outstate actors. Whitmer is doing very well with the public here.
Yeah, what about the response from the White House and President Donald Trump?
Well, his numbers seem to never change. He has his base. He never seems to grow from it or lose it. 43% approve of his handling of the pandemic here, including 27% who strongly approve. 50% disapprove of his handling of the pandemic, including 43% that strongly disapprove, and 47% of independent voters disapprove of his performance, while only 39% approve.
All right. Well, what about the threat of COVID-19 itself?
Well, more than 58% of Michiganders believe that the threat of COVID-19 has been balanced or downplayed, while 32% say it's been exaggerated, and more than 71% of respondents said we should reopen gradually to avoid a second wave.
So I guess the guys protesting with guns and assault rifles up at the Capitol in Lansing are not necessarily representative of the majority then, huh?
Yeah, not at all, Sven. They're getting a ton of media attention, but it's clear from this data that they're in the extreme minority. And I want to take a look at a subset of the data, which talks about, does this send the right message? Do those protests in Lansing send the right message? And the only group that says that this sends the right message would be 60% of Republican men between the ages of 40 and 64. But in general, Democrats and independents believe the protest sent the wrong message.
Interesting. I understand there's also a divide about the severity of the virus itself too, right?
Yeah, it gets to what you were starting this with talking about John Meacham, that we are in this post-fact world where your political affiliation seems to truly inform if you believe that COVID-19 is a significant threat, which personally blows my mind, but this is the world we live in today. More than 60% of respondents who identify as strong Republicans believe the economic damage is worse than the illness, compared to just 22% of all voters. Across all demographics, more than 55% of Michiganders are more concerned about their health, while only 22% are more worried about their financial situation. And of course, 19% are equally worried about both. Both are definitely concerns for folks. But only one demographic group saw a difference in this pattern, and you guessed it, strong Republicans. With them, 44% are more concerned about their financial situation, and that outweighs everything else around health. And then finally, I wanted to highlight something that illustrates this divide, but in a visual way that has been sharing all over social media, and that's the use of face masks. 89% of women wear a mask compared to only 72% of men. So that's one thing, the gender divide, that's among all parties. Now, while more than 72% of Republican women wear a mask, only 48% of Republican men wear masks, which it's really stark seeing that these demographic pull tabs are just starting to pull apart with divergent ideas of reality.
Yeah, and this, on the heels of the brouhaha over whether President Trump is going to wear a face mask when he tours the Ford plant here on Thursday. Anyway, what did respondents have to say about getting back to work?
Well, 2/3 of workers statewide feel safe going back to work now. But that number significantly changes when you dive in on race. Just 40% of African American respondents feel safe returning back to work. And that makes complete sense, considering the disproportionate impact that the coronavirus had on the African American community across the state and here in the city of Detroit. Those numbers are all up from the last poll last month. So it's definitely that people are definitely starting to feel better about getting back into the groove of things. And along those lines, and I'll finish out with this, is that they ask respondents to rank where they feel safe going to visit. And I'm going to share this, but I also encourage people to email us at dailydetroit@gmail.com with your own thoughts about where you feel safe going. Folks feel the most safe going to the grocery store, their doctor's office, and having small gatherings. Down at the bottom of the list are movie theaters, sporting events, and concerts. Sven, it's going to be a long time till we see a concert in person like we used to, sir.
Yep, and just like we talked about on the Friday show, it's a significant issue for people who work in live music venues or operate them. Yesterday, we told you that the bike share operator MOGO was scheduled to install bike rental stations this week in Oak Park. Now we have more details. We broke the news Wednesday on dailydetroit.com that MOGO is planning to launch the expansion of its bike sharing service on Thursday, June 4th. MOGO is adding 31 new bike rental kiosks and 140 bikes at 5 cities in southeast Oakland County and in central northwest Detroit. The new docking stations will be installed in Detroit's Palmer Park and Livernois Avenue of Fashion District, and then crossing 8 Mile Road in Ferndale, Oak Park, Royal Oak, Huntington Woods, and Berkeley. MOGO had originally planned to launch its expansion a year ago, but told Daily Detroit that it just took longer than anticipated to go through the federal grants process.
It's looking increasingly likely that the Woodward Dream Cruise won't happen this year, at least not as a sanctioned event. The Freep reports that the city councils in Birmingham and Huntington Woods this week both voted unanimously for resolutions asking to cancel the annual event, which is scheduled for August 15th. Ferndale is expected to weigh in next week, and the 5 other municipalities that line the Woodward route are also considering signing on.
Jared, to be clear, and I say this as somebody who lives a block off of Woodward, people are still likely to take to Woodward Avenue on August 15th and go out cruising. The difference here is that this would not be an official sanctioned event. There would be no special event permits issued for things like, the Mustang Alley and all the other stuff. Ford basically takes over downtown Ferndale for the Mustang Alley and all kinds of other stuff. They put up big stages and, bring huge trailers that they use to transport muscle cars and so forth. You wouldn't see anything like that. It would just be like an impromptu cruise. And I mean, I've lived here long enough to realize cruisers are going to cruise, right? I mean, people are already starting to do it. I on weekend nights, especially, I can hear the roar of, big V8 engines and stuff out on Woodward from a long way away. Like, people are already out doing this kind of stuff. And I mean, you and I even found a Facebook event for something called Dream Cruise 2.0. It's asking people to come out on Friday night and start impromptu cruising. The event reads, quote, "We've been stuck inside our houses for months and it's time to get out, soak up some sun and cruise Woodward," end quote.
Sven, I thought the 2.0 branding was done in the late 90s, early 2000s. Are we still doing 2.0 things?
Maybe they're talking about engine displacement. I don't know.
Well, the annual fireworks over on the Detroit River will go on, but with a new date and no in-person viewers, so that's interesting. It'll be a TV and radio-only affair on Monday, August 31st, and it'll air on WDIV TV Channel 4, WJR AM 760. The theme will be honoring our first responders, which is important in a city that was hit so hard by the coronavirus. Speaking of which, police are putting together a plan to make sure that people don't congregate downtown for this, which is the reverse of what usually happens, Sven. I mean, downtown is packed for this thing.
Yeah, Jared, I was going to stop you and just say this just has such a sad ring about it. Like, watch the fireworks, but not in person.
And on your TV.
I mean, unless you're, our man about town, Devin O'Reilly, and you got a nice view of the skyline from your, upper floor apartment, you're kind of out of luck here. You're going to be, who wants to watch fireworks on TV?
This gives me an idea, though, Sven. We need to start lobbying him to be, if groups of 10 or less are allowed, I feel like we need to start lobbying our man about town for a visit, sir.
Good idea.
Just as a note, the Ford fireworks that are put on by the parade company each year, I don't know if people realize that. It's actually done by the same folks who do the Thanksgiving parade. Well, they were originally scheduled for June 22nd. So TV only, and more than 2 months later than originally planned.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening, as always.
And thank you to our Patreons at patreon.com/dailydetroit. It's our members who have been helping us get us through this. It has been absolutely great. Thank you, by the way, some of you who have actually upped your contributions in the last couple of weeks. It's much appreciated. I know these are tough times, so it really means a lot to us. And I'm excited, Sven. Stickers are on the way.
I was going to say, we've got goodies coming. They've been a long time in coming, and that's actually just kind of the first of several things that we have planned, but that's what we can kind of divulge now. So stay tuned for those.
Oh, yeah, we've got some great things. We just don't want to talk about them for sure until we have shipping dates because, pandemic delays everything. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.